All right, so in the previous videos, we talked about the tags. We had a detailed discussion about what is the importance of the tags, how are they going to help us in the day-to-day operations and in the enterprise cloud environment. And we also talked about diagnose and solve problems in the previous sessions. Today, let's talk about the networking section. So what is this network? What are the network components we have which are attached to a virtual machine? And um, what are the different connectivity options we have? So that is what we are going to focus on in today's call. So if I start talking about the networking, let us assume that we have a virtual machine. So this is going to be your web VM. Okay, this is a web VM. And every virtual machine have three resource providers. If you remember the previous sessions, we have a compute resource provider, storage resource provider, network resource provider. Compute resource provider basically provides you the CPU and memory and a temporary disk. And storage, basically you get a OS disk and any additional data disk that you are attaching to your virtual machine. When it comes to the network, so basically you'll have your virtual network, okay, and you'll have your subnet. So this is going to be a subnet in our example, and this is our virtual network. Okay, so the VNet will have an address space. Let's say if you're giving us 10.0.0/16, okay, based on this VNet address space, your subnets are going to be created. Let's say this is going to be your web subnet, and the address space could be 10.0.0 0/24. So it's all depends on your requirement. You might choose the subnet. Let's say a specific subnet needs very less resources, less VMs deployed. Let's say around less than 50 virtual machines in that subnet, maybe less than 10 virtual machines in the subnet. So you can define the subnet accordingly. Okay, and based on this subnet address space, right? Your virtual machine will get a IP address. So instead of saying a virtual machine get an IP address, I have to be very specific here. Your virtual machine will have the network interface card. Okay, this network interface card will get a IP address. So this IP address will be allocated from the subnet address range that you have given. So in this example, this virtual machine NIC will have IP address as 10.0.0 dot, let's say 5. Start from 5. There are few IP addresses that are allocated for the Azure side or reserved for the Azure side, which we will talk about it later. So your virtual machine will have a NIC. The NIC will have IP address. This IP address we call it as a private IP address. Okay, and this IP address can only be accessible within this virtual network. It cannot be accessible over the internet without any VPN or any other network connectivity. Okay, so along with this private IP address, this NIC also supported to add a public IP address. So the public IP address, the name itself says you are going to purchase an IP address, and that IP address will be accessible over the internet, which means this IP accessing over the internet means your NIC is accessible over the internet, and you will be able to access the applications inside the virtual machine. You will be able to take remote connection of this virtual machine, right? So that is what it means. So, but in the Azure, right? Um, though you have a public IP assigned to your virtual machine, okay, we are going to control the inbound and outbound traffic. So with the service called network security group, okay. So let me say this is going to be a network security group, and this network security group will say energy, and this can be associated either in a subnet level, or you can associate this directly to your virtual machine network interface card. Okay, so what this network security group contains, okay, it contains the inbound rules and outbound rules. Okay, inbound rules and outbound rules. So what does this inbound rule says? Any request, any traffic reaching inside your virtual machine, I would say NIC, is called inbound. Any traffic going out of your network interface card or virtual machine is called outbound rules. Okay, I mean it's outbound connectivity, I would say. So the inbound and outbound communication is being controlled in the NSGs, network security groups. So NSG rules have uh, certain components. Both inbound and outbound rules have certain components. They are like, priority numbers. Okay, the priority number, and the actions such as allow or deny. So when you are creating a rule, so what is the rule? The rule explain you about what port to be allowed, okay, or denied, and how you have to allow or deny. Is it based on the IP address or based on the subnet IP address, or probably you want to assign through ASGs, application security groups, right? You want to also associate with the service tags. Okay, so these are the options you have. So there is a source that you're going to specify. There's a destination IP address that you're going to specify. The source can be through IP address or a specific subnet, or can be ASG, subnet, service tags. These service tags are Azure specific. Okay, and same thing, destination can be source, destination can be IP address or a subnet or ASG, or through to a service tags. So these are the options you have it. So by default, there are rules. So um, the rules, what it says is default rules, okay, for inbound and outbound. The default rules, what it says, any communication from the internal load balancer is allowed. Any communication within the virtual network is allowed. Okay, other than these two, any request coming, right, that is by default denied. Okay, so when I say internal load balancer, probably you might have a load balancer defined, and your virtual machines are behind this load balancer, and this should be internal load balancer, right? If the traffic is coming from this load balancer, that is allowed. Okay, that is what it means. Okay, and if the traffic, if the communication happening between the virtual machines within the same subnet or within the different subnet, right, but it's all in the same virtual network, that is allowed. Any other than this, any request coming from the internet is by default blocked. This is the default inbound rules. Okay, and these rules cannot be modified or cannot be deleted. So now you have a requirement, you have an application running inside the virtual machine, and you want that application to be accessible over the internet. Okay, in this case we don't have any load balancer, so we want to access through a public IP address, right? So if you want to allow this rule, right, allow this port, let's say the port can be 80 or port can be 443 to access the website or application that is running inside the virtual machine. If you want to allow these rules, these ports, you don't need to modify the existing default rules. Instead of that, you can create a new rule. Okay, so new rule with this specific information that you specified. In simple words, I would say specify the source and specify the destination along with the priority number and the action to be performed, allow or deny. When you specify this, the default rules can be override, and your traffic can be allowed inside the virtual machine. So the default rules can be overridden with the lower priority than these rules. Let's say the ILB or VNet deny rule. Let's say deny rule is, let's say 65,000 is the number. Okay, and if you create any rule lower than this deny rule, that will automatically allow the communication. If I go back to the Azure virtual machine, this is the network security group I am saying, but this network security group is attached to the network interface card of your virtual machine. So if you look at this, right, so this is the network interface card for assigned to your virtual machine, and that is the name of your network interface card, and it is part of the VNet and the subnet. This network interface card have a public IP address and a private IP address. Okay, and if you want to see the why this we got this IP address, so if we go to this sub virtual network and go to the subnet, you see the web subnet address space. Based on this address space, you got the IP address for your network interface card. All right, if I go back to the network interface card, if I click on this, right, So you can see it is attached to your virtual machine, and there is another thing attached to this virtual machine is the network security group. Okay, and if you go back to the settings, in the settings you can see network security group is associated. Usually in the enterprise, we generally don't go for this network security group. We just say none in the NIC level. So NIC is nothing but network interface card. We'll just remove this. We don't want to associate in the network interface card level. We don't want to associate this. Instead of that, what we do is we will associate this NSGs in the subnet level. If I do a refresh here, the NSG is not associated because I just removed it. So what I do, I go to the virtual network and I will go to the subnet and I'll click on this subnet. You see security group is not associated at the moment. I go to this, and here one of the property you say network security group. Here I'm going to associate the network security group that was created earlier. So I will just say this one, okay, and save this. Okay, you can see that network security group is associated. If I go back to the virtual machine and do a refresh, you can see the network security group is attached in a subnet level, which means any VM that is created within the subnet will have this network security group is attached. In case if you want to modify any rule or allow any rule, you just need to modify here. So it will be applicable to all the machines within the subnet. Okay, so if I click on this, so these are the default rules that I was specifying. Okay, and allow VNet inbound. The so port can be anything, protocol can be anything, source is virtual network, destination is virtual network, which means any communication within this virtual networks is allowed. The action says allowed. And the another one, which you see the priority number is 65,001, allow Azure load balancer inbound and any port, any protocol, and the source is request is coming from any load balancer. Destination can be anything in the VNet is allowed. So other than these two, right? If any other actions, you see any to any, which means any port, any protocol, any source, any destination is denied. So if you look at this, right, the deny is at the end, which means it has a priority number which is a very high priority number. Okay, but how energy works is when the request came to energy for any validation, it go for the lowest priority number. Okay, lowest priority number is 65,001 or 65,000. So based on this, the rule is allowed. If any VM communicating within this virtual network, it will be automatically allowed, because this rule will not be applied because there is 65,000 rule is already available, which is the lower priority number than the deny rule. So the thumb rule here is whenever you want to create any rule to allow any communication, it's always better to create a rule before the deny rule with a lower priority number than the deny rule. Then it will automatically allow. If I want to allow add any new rule, I can just click on add inbound rule. Okay, click on add inbound rule, and in the source, you see the properties source port, destination, and service if you want to specify. Otherwise you can go with the destination port, and what is the protocol, what is the action, what is the priority number, and name of the rule, and you have a description. You can specify why you want to create this rule, right? So here you can add multiple ports here and multiple IP address as well here. The source, you can specify any IP address, and Microsoft introduced the new feature, my IP address. The browser will automatically fetch your system IP address, your public IP address, and it will allow the IP address here. Otherwise, you can specify and specific IP address. The IP address can be a specific IP address, or maybe it can be a set of address spaces. You can specify here. And if I go to service tag that I mentioned, The service tag is a Azure virtual network, load balancer, API management. Let's say if you think there is any request coming from these service tags, let's say if I say load balancer, if any request coming from the load balancer, you can say whether to allow or deny at the end. So this is like between the um, Azure services, right? You see these are all the Azure services. If you want to allow the communication with the Azure services, you are going to specify the service tags. Okay, and application security groups. So with the application security group, let me just take a few moments to explain that what is an application security group. So assume that you have multiple virtual machines. Okay, VM1, VM2, and VM3, and like a couple of other machines as well. So just assume these are like, database servers. These are the application servers or a combination of web servers. So sometimes this VM, all web servers need to talk to the DB servers. Okay. And they can be part of a different, subnets as well, right? So if you want to allow the communication between multiple virtual machines, what's happening is you have to create a rule, and sometimes the rule can be clumsy, or maybe you might see multiple IP addresses are added in the NSG rule. It's gonna give you a lot of conflict, or you might see a lot of human errors, right? So while you're updating this IP address in the NSG rule, you might see issues like you might update the wrong IP address, right? So if I go back to this IP address, when you're adding IP address here 10.0.0.6 and comma and 10.0.0.7, right? Likewise, when you're adding multiple IP addresses in one rule, right? You want to allow the communication from application to database or web servers to database servers. You have to add IP address here. Maybe you might add subnet ranges as well. Maybe within the VNet, there are like, let's say 15 to 20 subnets, and 15 to 20 subnets, you might have multiple IP addresses. Different servers need to connect to each other. So it's going to give you a lot of, confusion, for your Azure administrators, who is going to modify these energies. Even if you make a one simple mistake, it's going to impact broadly, right? Let's say, so your Azure administrator, let's say I'm just going to say, um, let me do this way, comma, just giving you like these many IP addresses are there. All right. So when somebody is modifying this IP address, let's say they removed one IP address, they removed while updating the IP, a new IP address, they removed one IP address and saved it. And this is giving you, because you removed an IP address, that IP address can be your production web application, which need to talk to the database server. And that's a human error, right? So just because of small change, you might see huge downtime, and you don't remember, who made these changes, or, when this change made, and it may take some time, couple of hours, maybe, days to identify what changes happened, right? So because there are multiple IP addresses, to avoid these problems, right? To avoid this problem, what we do is, okay, we create a application security groups. Let's say web ASC. Okay, web ASC. And here I'm going to create a DB ASC. Okay. So you might have multiple web servers. Let's say you have 15 web servers. Okay. 15 web servers. You have, let's say, 5 to 6 database servers. Okay. So what we are going to say is you create ASG and add all your database servers to DBASG, and add all web servers to WebASC. Okay, so later you create one rule which will allow the communication between the WebASC to DBASG and DBASG to WebASC if needed bidirectional. Okay, you allow this, which means you are creating one rule that allow the communication between the two different uh, applications, right? One is a web and another one is a database. Maybe in future you have couple of other servers, let's say 16 web servers, 17 web server, 18 web servers. You just add them to the ASG. You don't modify the NSG rule. You're not going to modify the NSG rule. You're just going to add VM to the ASG, and since you created a communication here, it's going to allow the communication automatically. Okay, so let's create one ASG, two ASGs, and I will show you how it is going to work. So if you understand this properly, we are allowing the communication using ASGs within the Azure environment, right? So it's not the communication or request coming from the internet, because we are allowing the communication within the Azure virtual machines. Let me search application security groups. You see here application security groups. Don't go for application group, they are different. We are referring application security groups, which is ASG. I'm creating the application security group here, and let's say which location our virtual machine is available. It's in east west location. Okay, so let's create a new resource group, ASG EUS. All right, I'm going to say this is my web ASG, and this is going to be east west location, and create this. There's no other properties here, just creating a ASG. It's just like a tag. Okay, just creating this one. Let me go back to application security groups, and I'll add another one. I'm going to use same ASG. I'm going to say web iPhone ASG. Okay, it's going to be DB. We already created a web, right? So create this one as well. Now what I will do is I will allow the communication between these two ASGs. Okay, so if I go back to the application security groups, do a refresh here. So I should be able to see other one as well, DB. Yeah, you see the two ASGs. Now what I will do is I will go ahead and create a new rule in the NASG. So I'll go to the web VM, go to the networking section, add an inbound rule. So source is my application security group. Here I'm going to fetch my web ASG, and port can be, let's say, 1433. Application to database, it will be mostly 1433, right? So destination, again I want to specify application security group, and I can also specify the destination ASG here, and destination port. If you want to specifically call out 1433, you can. Source port, usually we specify a star, or because source can be anything, right? While sending the communication from source, it can pick up the random ports, so it can be star. And destination port specifically for the 1433. If you go to the custom, right, custom will have MS SQL. MS SQL automatically takes the 1433. No, it's taking 3306. We'll see SQL specific, this one. Yeah, MS space SQL. It's taking 1433. Okay, and the priority number always go for the lesser than the deny rule. So the deny rule is 65,500 now. So I'll go with the let's say 100 rule. Okay, and you can specify allow application security group MS SQL inbound. I would say allow, or let's say web to DB ASG and 1433. Okay, this is the port, and I can say created this rule to allow communication between web servers to DB servers, or application servers to DB server. If If you need any other missions in future to communicate to the DB, you just need to add the server to this ASGs. Now we allowed the communication. Okay. Now we allowed the communication. You see this is 1433 between the ASGs, between the Azure only. Okay, it's not coming from the internet. Now we added ASGs, right? How we are going to add VMs to this application security group, right? So let me do a refresh again here just to ensure the values are populating. Going to the virtual machine, this is my web server. Going to the networking, we are on the same page, but you see application security group here. Click on configure the application security group. So this is my web server. I'm going to associate the web ASE. Save this. Okay, so my virtual machine is part of the web ASE. All right, so this will take a few seconds. Okay, now I'll go for another virtual machine. I'll say this is, just assume this is your database server. Okay, just say db and save this one. So which means between these two virtual machines, the communication should be allowed. Okay, they are in two different virtual networks. Okay, they're two different things. Okay, assuming that the two virtual networks are communicating and the virtual machines between with each other in the two different virtual network can be able to communicate because they are part of the ASGs. Okay, so that's how you allow the ASGs in the energies. That's the importance of the ASGs, and most of the times in the production we follow the same method. Okay, so this is about the application security groups in the network security group. So the network security group have a default rules which will allow the communication between the VNet and the load balancer, and it has a deny rule. So other than these two rules, if any request coming, it's gonna deny the access. In case if you want to allow a specific communication to a specific IP address, you can create a new rule, inbound rule, with a lower priority than the deny rule. So this is for the inbound, where the communication or request coming into your virtual machine network interface card, and if any traffic that needs to go out of your virtual machine, so that's the outbound rule. So in the outbound rules, so you see allow VNet outbound is by default allowed, and to the internet also it is allowed. So within the VNet they can talk to each other, and to the internet it is allowed. Other than these two criteria, if there's any other request, it's going to be blocked. Okay, so by default you don't need to make any changes here. It will be default all the time. Okay, so this is to manage at a subnet level, right? So before reaching the subnet, if you want to control the traffic, you have to use a firewall. Usually, any enterprise cloud environment will have the DMZ environment set up. In the DMZ environment, you will have the firewalls like Palo Alto or Barracuda. So maybe couple of customers might be using the Azure firewall as a service to control the inbound outbound traffic there. So later it reaches to the VNet, and within the VNet the subnet level you have energies, and energy you will have a control here. So different layers you have the security in place when it comes to the cloud environment. One is at a DMZ network level, the other one is within the energy as well. Okay, so in the on-prem VMware or Hyper-V, you might see ACLs, access control list. Here you see energies. Okay, this is another layer where you have this controllers available. Okay, so now we talked about the rules. So where we started is, we start with the NIC. We learned about private IP address. Then we learned about public IP address. So to access your VM, so we are using the public IP address. And though you have a public IP associated, you cannot access the VM because NSE is there. So that's where we started NSE conversation. And NSE have inbound rule, outbound rules. There are default rules. And if you want to allow any specific ports, you have to create a new rule with the lower priority than the deny rule. So assuming that you have the public IP address and you have the exception in the NSG, then you will be able to take a remote connection or access the application inside your virtual machine. But what is the best practice, right? We learned, okay, you have a public IP address, you can add exception in NSG, right? So is it a best practice? No. So you never associate a public IP for your virtual machine, because the public IP is accessible over the internet, and there could be some host, some applications which might interrupt your application server, web server, might compromise your server, or your cloud environment, right? So it's always suggested to not expose your VM IP address or VM informations to the public cloud or internet, right? So that's why we disable the public IP address. And when you disable a public IP address, there is no need to add exception in the NSV. So you can still go with the default rules, such as allowing communication only within the VNet or true load balancer. Remaining things can be blocked over the internet, right? So those can be also be removed. Now the question is, if I don't have the NSG exception allowed, if I don't have the public IP allowed, how do I connect to this machine, right? Let's say I'm an Azure administrator, maybe I'm a Windows Server administrator. So I need to log into the server to check some performance issues. I need to log into the server to install some application. Maybe I'm an application team engineer. So as an application engineer, I have to log into the server, configure IAS service, and install an application. So some are the other ways, some are the other use cases will be there where users need to connect to the machine and perform certain tasks. So what are the options they have it? So you keep on hearing on on Azure a point to site VPN and a site to site VPN. Okay, and you might see here express route. You might see load balancer NAT rules. Okay, you might hear Azure firewall. Okay, so with these you will be able to connect to your virtual machine. You have Azure Bastion host as well. So what are these, and do we really implement this in the enterprise environment? Yes, sometimes it's all depends on the customer to customer and environment to environment, right? So point to set VPN is nothing but you have a remote user, uh, could be an application user, application engineer. He could be a Windows admin who manage the Windows servers or Linux admin. So an administrator who need to connect through a remote like home network, right? So what we do is we install a VPN client in user's laptop, and we'll install a certificate in user's laptop. And when you install it, and when you connect through VPN to Azure Virtual Network, there is a gateway here that we set up. Using this gateway, the communication is secured, and this communication is encrypted, and it is like secure data transfer that is going to happen. And since there is secure data tunnel established from user's laptop to the Azure Virtual Network gateway, so the user can talk to this machine using the private IP address without allowing the public IP address. So the communication here over this tunnel is secured. It is secured through SSTP, Secure Socket Tunneling Protocol, and that's why we will be able to connect. If it is site-to-site VPN, you have your corporate network, your corporate office. You just go to the corporate office, and from the corporate office to this virtual network, you will have the site-to-site VPN established, which is basically IPsec tunnel. So over this tunnel, the traffic is encrypted and encapsulated so that you can have a confidence on your data security. So using this secure tunnel, you'll be able to connect. So be it a point to site or site to site VPN, the communication happens over the internet, but it is in an encrypted channel. But with the express route, it is for the use cases where you have you need a dedicated circuit. Um, so usually scenarios could be like you have a large amount of data that needs to be uploaded to the Azure. You want to migrate multiple servers, let's say, and the servers have so much of data that needs to be transferred, and you don't have much time to complete the project. So such scenarios, where you need high bandwidth and the data won't go over the internet, no need to go over the internet, then express route is the best solution for you. It is a bit expensive than the site to site VPN or point to site VPN, but it has more features where data can be very fast. You can upload the data with a very fast bandwidth. You get gigabytes of network band speed, and it will have a direct connectivity to your Azure instances. Okay, so this another way to connect. And the other way is a load balancer natural. So you can create a front external facing load balancer, internet facing load balancer. Within the load balancer, you have something called NAT rules. So you can create a network address translator rule, and that will in turn give a connectivity to your virtual machine. The other one is Azure Firewall. In Azure Firewall, also you can use the same concept as you used in the load balancer. You use a NAT rule in the firewall. So you basically your users are going to use the public IP of your Azure Firewall, and that will internally connect to your virtual machine in the backend. So there is something called Bastion host. So this can be configured within the Azure Virtual Network. So when you go to Azure portal, you will be able to see a connect option, and there you can see a connect to a Bastion host. So it will basically open a browser, and within the browser, you will be able to connect to this virtual machine. And the virtual machine IP is not exposed to the internet. And here the communication is again secured and encrypted. So these are the different connectivity options what we have in the cloud, and we'll try to implement as many connectivity scenarios as possible in the next sessions. Okay, so now we learned about the network interface card. Under the networking section, we have network interface card, and network interface card will have a IP address. One is the private IP address, the other one is the public IP address. If you just come here, you'll be able to see this network interface card is part of the VNet and the subnet. You can see the subnet. All right, and based on this subnet, your network interface card received an IP configuration. This IP configuration has a private IP address and public IP address. Public IP address is always an optional thing, it's not mandatory. And in the enterprise cloud environment, we will always disable the public IP address. In fact, we create policies to disable this public IP address. If you want to disable the public IP address, just unselect this option and click on save it. It's gonna remove the public IP address. And when it comes to this private IP address, if you want to configure as a static IP address, you can always configure a static IP address like this. So though your VM stop deallocated, and your IP address still will be allocated to your virtual machine. So that's about the network interface card. And this network interface card can have a network security group. You have an option to associate a network security group, but in general, for any application server, web servers, or database servers, we generally do not recommend associating this in a NIC level. Instead, you associate this in a subnet level. So the scenarios like firewalls, firewall appliances, there you might have an option, might have a requirement to associate NSG in a NIC level as well. But in the other than the firewall appliances, most of the scenarios you don't require to associate this NSG in a NIC level. So there's something called DNS. So by default, we use the Azure DNS for any name resolution. In case if you want to use custom DNS, you can specify the custom DNS here, DNS IP address. But the recommendation is right not to update this DNS server in the NIC level. You can update DNS server in the virtual network level. You have an option to update the DNS server in the virtual network level. So all the machines within that virtual network will follow the same DNS server. Okay, so this is about the IP configuration, DNS, and NSG's information for your network interface card, which is associated with your virtual machine. And there can be more than one network interface card that can be attached to your virtual machine. And the scenarios could be, you want to use the one NIC for a specific set of applications, other network interface card for specific other set of applications. Some communications might need to talk to database servers. Some application need to talk to external, some application need to talk to internal. In such scenarios, right, if you combine those applications in one VM, in such scenarios we create a multiple mix, and we control the operations or inbound outbound traffic operations through multiple network interface cards. And this NIC will have NSGs, and NSGs have these rules, and with these rules we are going to control the inbound outbound traffic. Though you have a firewall system in DMZ, we are still controlling the inbound outbound traffic through NSGs, and most of the organization follow this method. Okay, so this is about the today's concept. In the next session we will talk about how you can set up the site-to-site VPN. This is again, we are trying to communicate over the internet to your virtual machine, but we also have to learn within the Azure, between the virtual network, how you are going to communicate, what is the best method. Once we learn the communication from the internet, we'll try to learn how we can establish a communication within the Azure environment and what is the best method. I was just talking about this side to side VPN and point to side VPN, and are we going to directly connect to the virtual network where your virtual machines are exist, or we are going to use the virtual vans or any other concept. We will talk about it, right? So that we are going to discuss. So once we talk about external communication, internal communication, you will get some good idea about the Azure VM networking. If you are Azure administrator, what are the tasks you are going to perform as part of the networking requirement? If I just summarize the day-to-day tasks that you get based on the topic that we covered on the networking side. So the day you log in, you might see a ticket landing into your queue saying, hey, I'm not able to communicate from web server to the database server. So what you're going to do is you're going to check the source and destination. So they say web to database is not accessible. So they may or may not give the web server IP address or DB server IP address. You might have to get into call with the customer, understand the IP, so what is the source and what is the destination IP addresses. Once you get the IP address information, so we have a service called Network Watcher, which I will try to demonstrate in the next session. So using the Network Watcher, you are going to validate whether the port is allowed in the NSG or not. So that will tell you which port is allowed and what is the rule it's allowing and what is the rule which is denying the communication. So based on that, if you see that port is not allowed, you are going to ask the request, hey, the port is denied. We have to allow the communication between the source and destination, and you are going to ask, hey, is it a temporary request or is it going to be a permanent request? If it is a temporary request or permanent request, what is the business use case? Why do you want to do the communication? So that if it is a permanent request, so you can put a request to your automation team during the build phase. Please allow this communication so that you don't get such requests in the future. Okay, so that's improvement plan that you are going to work. If it is temporary request, you have to make a note of it and how long it is require the communication. You might have to get approval from your technical leads, maybe business owners, about the approvals. Sometimes you might have to go to security team, because if you think the communication between these servers to source and destination might be little critical applications, if you think that is require, if you need to go have another review, you might have to go to security team to get approval. So generally you don't go to that level, because the strict procedures will be already defined, what kind of requests we can allow, what kind of requests we cannot allow. So you will have a standard documentation in place. As when you join any organization, they will try to give you a training on what kind of ports we can allow, what kind of ports we cannot allow it, what is the standard ports, what are the non-standard ports. If it is standard ports, you can go ahead and get approval with your technical lead or group manager, and just create a change request and get approvals. Okay, again, you have to review whether it's a communication between the production environment or non-production environment, or between the non-production to the production, between the dev environment to the production environment, or QA to the production. So those kind of rules and procedures also will be defined in your organization, the organization which you're going to apply. So you need to learn those as part of your knowledge transfer sessions. So you get all this request and your day goes like reviewing this energy request and start applying or adding them or updating them. Okay, and sometimes you might have to get into the call with the customer to troubleshoot some issues. Though the ports are allowed, still they are not able to connect to the application to DB. So in such scenarios, though it is out of your scope, we have to try to assist the customer. So maybe sometimes the DB service are not running, application service are not running, application is not configured properly. So you might have to isolate the problem by logging into the server, doing some telnet communication between the source to target. In case if it is telnet is not working, you might say, okay, you have to go to your network architecture, how the communication is happening between the source to destination. Is there any firewall appliance in between, where the traffic is being routed? Is it going through a firewall? Then you have to check with your firewall team or route the users to firewall team, so they will allow the port in the firewall as well. It's not always between the energies, sometimes in between there is a firewall as well. So those kind of things you have to validate, and you will be collaborating with a bit different teams. So as part of this, your Azure administrator roles, you need an active collaboration between the different teams, between the network team, between the operating system team, application team, and you might have to collaborate with your project managers, end customers. So there's a lot of coordination, collaborations required when you're working in the real time. So though it is a simple task, right? Just showing you how to allow it, but you have to follow the procedure. The procedures are defined for a specific purpose. It allows you to secure your cloud environment, and it allows you to reduce any human errors, right? So it's though it takes time, that's totally fine, but we have to ensure that we do the right thing for our customers. Okay, so that's about the energies and kind of requests you get it. The other request, I think mostly in the networking side, you might see configuring a point to set VPN for a specific users, set of users, you might to configure it. But other than that, side-to-side VPN and express route, you might see this connections already established. And if you're working as L2, you don't even get a chance to configure them in real time. So if you get an opportunity, it is well and good. You have a plenty of documentation that you can go through it. So before you configure it, there will be certain instructions will be given to you by your leads. What should be the IP address range? What should be the gateway, local network gateway, and all the information will be given you. Nothing to worry. But it's important you understand the concept. Where do you use side-to-side VPN? Where do you use point-to-side VPN? What is the difference between point-to-side VPN and side-to-side VPN express route? They are the three connectivity options, right? What is the difference between them, and when to use point-to-side, when to use side-to-side VPN? Even in the interview, they might ask you the difference between these three things, right? And mostly you don't see anybody using load balancer NAT, but there is an option available in case if somebody want to use it with a less cost, they can go with the NAT, load balancer NAT tools. If there are very less people who are going to access the VMs, right, then you can suggest the load balancer NAT tool, because this doesn't require any gate for anything. So there is a Azure firewall. Now people are using, companies are using the Azure firewall. Bastion host is a little bit of costly. People are not using it. With the Azure firewall, you not only use the NAT tools, you might use it for other purpose as well, right? Controlling the inbound request, outbound request as a firewall. So these are the kind of questions you might get it. You might get a request to allow the rules in the firewall, or allow the rules in the energies, and configure a NAT tool for specific VMs and the load balancer, or enable the Bastion host. So not able to connect to the virtual machine. You will start looking at the virtual machine status, and which IP they are trying to connect from, what is IP address of the VM that they are trying to connect. Then you will start troubleshooting them. Okay, so once you learn these components, once you implement it, you will be able to get some more clarity about how we can start troubleshooting such issues. Okay, so that's all about it for today. In the next session, we will try to implement point-to-side VPN and other connectivity methods, so you get some more clarity. Thank you again for your time today. If you have any questions, please do let me know.